So you're reading for us something that I'm guessing is fairy tale inspired,
It is.
Sophia White and her seven promises.
Yeah, I will be reading from that. So the premise behind it is Sophia White and her seven promises, Snow White and the seven dwarfs. And just as a little hint, I tried to match up the promises with a dwarf. So I literally have a scene where like she's in a dusty area and trying to make a promise, but she sneezes.
Delightful.
So Snow White inspired, but also kind of its own story. To kind of prep you, the doctor finds her in the forest. She's completely unconscious and he brings her back. And then this next chapter then is her waking up and kind of coming out of a bad nightmare and trying to fumble all of her thoughts together.
Awesome.
Something fundamental teased her memory, something more than her nightmare. She could not quite put her finger on what it was she had forgotten. Whatever it was, she would not get to it with the state of her head. She couldn't even move to find out what else was in the room. Clean and white. The walls and ceiling were clean and white, and that felt safe. She should probably know where this clean place was. That was something she should remember. Was that the thing teasing her memory? Why couldn't she remember where she was? The wool blanket over her felt real. She rubbed her fingers against the fuzzy material and tried to think about being in a bed under a white ceiling with a wool blanket. These things must add up to remembering something. Her head hurt, and there was nothing else there except for confusion and pain. She tilted her out over so she could see a wooden stand and a chair. There was a wash basin and rolled linen. Something else was missing, though. A chamber pot? Daylight danced through white curtains. The room was not bright, but light enough that she could tell the sun was out. Another thought drifted in. Just as her dream had left in little wisps, more questions filtered into her mind. Who was taking care of her? Was she with family, friends? Was there a physician, an apothecary? Had she ever felt so alone before? She couldn't remember. Eventually, someone would check on her. Someone would come in, probably in clean clothes, and maybe they would be surprised she was awake. And that someone would say things. It would probably hurt to process any sound, but she wanted the comforting presence of another human being more than she worried about noises feeling like nails in her skull. She was done staring at the wash basin. Closing her eyes, she used her ears to listen for any sounds. Outside, a bird tweeted. That sounded normal. There was not any bustle of a city street, so she was not anywhere busy. Warmth seeped around her heart, along with a sweet sort of relief that she was recuperating in the quiet countryside. For someone with excruciating head pain, there were still little things to be grateful for. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, her room was clean. There was the soft click of a door latch, and she felt the room's atmosphere change as someone came in. It might have been a small deception, but she kept her eyes closed. It wasn't that she didn't want to know who entered the room. She wanted to know what they would do if they thought she was still asleep. Feet shuffled forward, slow and deliberate. The steps sounded purposeful. There was a warm, smooth touch on her wrist and a small metal click. A minute later, a masculine whisper muttered, "About 100." The touch moved to her head, and smooth skin delicately brushed hair away from her neck. Another quiet mutter. "Bandages are fine." Why hadn't she noticed the bandages on her head? Why had she not felt those sooner? Her eyes opened to see a tall man hovering over her. His crisp white shirt and dark waistcoat covered a broad chest. Her gaze traveled up a clean-shaven neck, a chiseled jawline, and a masculine face. The green, golden brown of his eyes blended into a mesmerizing hazel and dark brown eyebrows scrunched together. His eyebrows perfectly matched the color of his short hair, and she focused on how soft it looked with the dull sunlight behind the fine strands. "You are awake." He left her side to drag over the wooden chair. His voice, deep and calming, blanketed her mind in comfort. If only she could remember who he was. How long had she been sleeping? His lips, a healthy shade of rosewood, smiled at her. She found his every movement far too intriguing and swallowed, self-conscious of her unhealthy state. This was the man taking care of her while she was stuck in bed, wrapped in bandages? He had touched her a moment ago, and suddenly the gesture felt much more personal than it probably had been for him. His voice warm, low, and blessedly quiet. He said, "Hello." She parted her lips, the simple statement reassuring her. She wanted to say something back. Anything? Her throat did know how to make sounds, did it not? He went on. Perhaps I should say good morning. If you are up to it, I will have breakfast brought up. She didn't have to respond to him with words. Her rumbling stomach did that for her while warm embarrassment traveled up her neck. He laughed, a sound she could listen to all day, far better than the chirping of the birds. Now that she knew it was morning, her mind latched onto that tidbit and found a soothing amount of normalcy in knowing the time of day. Finally, she found her voice. Good morning? He immediately stood and she winced at how scratchy her voice sounded, even in her own ears. He brought her a sip of water and the clear taste of it washed some of the wool feeling out of her mouth. He asked, how does your head feel? Excruciating. He nodded as if he knew the extent of her injuries and understood them. His every action made her feel validated. Real. He held a finger up in front of her face. Can you follow the movement of my finger with your eyes? He moved his finger back and forth, and she tried to follow it. A sear of pain behind her eyes made her whimper. He nodded and withdrew his finger. What is your name? He asked it as if he had a list for a routine inspection. How is your head? Follow my finger. What is your name? She opened her mouth because that is what one did when one started to answer a question. She closed her mouth because that is what one did when they realized they did not know what to say. She tried again. I... He prompted her softly. Your name? I... He pressed his lips together in a line, the simple gesture slicing her with doubt and worry. She tried to pull letters or sounds into her head, anything that sounded familiar, but nothing came. After stuttering over a few of the common consonant sounds, she sobbed, I don't know. She didn't know who she was. She didn't know where she was, what happened to her, who he was, how long she had been here. She didn't know her name. What was wrong with her? What kind of a person didn't know their name? The truly broken kind. And that was it. That was the thing teasing her head, the thing she had been avoiding since having woken. She had no memory, none at all. She could speak and she knew things about the countryside and the birds, but when she thought about herself, there was nothing. She was a featureless shadow in a world of sunshine. He thumped into the chair and clasped her hand in his grip encompassing and gentle. She watched his hazel eyes as they settled on her face. He was the epitome of calm, and he must somehow be sharing some of it with her. She took a deep breath, sniffled, and waited for him to say anything. When he was quiet, she latched onto an idea of hope. You must know who I am. It is my head wound, is it not? It has affected my memory. But you can tell me my name. He shook his head, and she realized how much she had put into that quick thought of hope. Her body felt as if it were plummeting back into the shadows, despair leeching away everything, her eyes closing. He squeezed her fingers. She wasn't sure if the gesture was meant to reassure her or remind her that he was still there. He said, You are safe here. It is not unexpected to forget some things. You are correct that you are healing from a head wound, and we will focus on that healing one step at a time. Safe. She did feel safe. She felt lonely, useless, full of despair, and pain circulated through her entire body, but she did feel safe. He went on, We will focus on the small things for now. Rest is a must. It is the best thing for you, and I know many things must hurt right now. Even though she had no memory, she was certain that was the most understated comment she had ever heard. Everything hurt, a lot. But together we will make it better. Your body is healing, and it is my hope that in time your mind will as well, one step at a time. You have cuts and bruises, many of which are already looking better. Your head wound is healing. That simple fact that you are awake now brings immense relief to me. It shows me that we will continue to move forward with this process. He spoke of hope when she had so little. Then he slid his hand from hers, gave her fingers a little pat, and she heard him stand. He had hope, but he wasn't the one lying in bed, bandaged, bruised, and broken. Tired. Her eyes were already closed, but a heaviness tugged on the rest of her, pulling her down into the deep spiral of sleep. She managed to blink her eyes a moment, expecting to see him standing there. She hadn't heard him move away. He was gone, and she realized belatedly that not only did she not know her name, but she didn't know his. Adding it to the pile of things she didn't know, she felt the weight of all the things she didn't even know she didn't know. No, that was the weight of her sleepiness tugging her deeper down the spiral. There was probably another nightmare waiting for her at the bottom, but she was too tired to stay awake.